I still remember the day it all started like it was yesterday, though it's been decades. I was sitting on the porch of my little farmhouse, sipping on black coffee, watching the early morning fog settle over the fields. That's when I saw him, Michael, my best friend since childhood, walking down the dirt path toward me, his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't yet name. Now, don't get me wrong, Michael had always been a man of charm, the kind who could make anyone trust him with a smile or a joke. But that morning there was a stiffness to him, a weight that pressed down like a storm cloud. And if there's one thing life teaches you, it's that people carry storms in ways you never notice until it's too late. You know, folks, life has this sneaky way of teaching lessons when you least expect it, and I was about to get one I'd never forget. Michael had always been close to Laura, my Laura, the woman I'd loved since we were kids, the one whose laugh could light up a whole room. And he came with that grin, pretending like nothing was off, but I caught it, just a flicker in his eyes that told me he knew something I didn't. "Morning, Henry," he said, voice too smooth, too rehearsed. "Beautiful day, huh?" I nodded, keeping my face calm. "Yeah, real nice." I didn't ask him what he was doing here. Something told me I should have. Maybe that's the first mistake I made, letting curiosity fester into suspicion without confronting it right away. And let me tell you, if there's one thing I've learned in 70 years, it's that curiosity is a double-edged sword. You either get the truth or you invite trouble. Laura came out then, carrying a basket of freshly baked muffins. She smiled at Michael, and I swear the way her eyes lingered a little too long on him, just a second, made my stomach drop. Not that I doubted her loyalty, mind you, but life is never that simple. And you elders know this. Sometimes the heart sees what the mind refuses to acknowledge. Michael sat down on the porch swing beside me. "Henry," he said softly, "you ever feel like life's unfair?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Every damn day, Mike. Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out at the fields like he was searching for words in the horizon. And then he said it, something so subtle, so casual that most folks would have missed it, but I didn't. Things change, people change, even friends, even families. I raised an eyebrow, but didn't press him. I should have. Every instinct in me screamed to dig deeper, but I kept my composure. And that's when Laura laughed, light, airy, completely unaware of the tension thickening between us. That laugh, it was beautiful, but in that moment it felt like the last echo of innocence before a storm. You see, what I'm telling you isn't some fairy tale. This was real life, full of subtle betrayals and moral choices that leave scars longer than any wound you can see. And it all started small. Small favors, little lies, gestures that seemed innocent. Michael started helping Laura more than he had before, always around, always volunteering for things I didn't even ask for, and I, foolishly, told myself I was imagining it. One evening, about a week later, Michael invited me to his study. I remember thinking, what could he possibly want? He closed the door behind me, and suddenly that casual smile of his turned serious. "Henry," he said, voice low, "I need to tell you something. Something complicated." I leaned back in the chair, studying him. "Go on." He hesitated, then said, "It's about Laura. She's been asking me for advice. About life. About us." I felt a cold wind brush across my spine, though the windows were closed. "Us?" I asked slowly. He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "She's confused, Henry. She doesn't know what she wants, and I thought maybe I could help her see clearly." There it was, that innocent phrasing, the kind that could mean nothing or mean everything. My mind raced. Help her see clearly or help her see him differently. I didn't speak. I just nodded, letting the silence stretch between us. You know, sometimes the loudest truths arrive in whispers, and the quietest moments carry the heaviest weight. Over the next few days, I noticed things that didn't sit right. Laura would be gone for hours, saying she was meeting Michael to discuss plans. He started calling her at odd times, leaving voicemails that sounded perfectly normal, but had a rhythm I knew too well, the rhythm of someone testing boundaries. And me, I was angry, yes, but more than anger, I was disappointed. Betrayal isn't always loud. Often it's silent. It's the things unsaid, the glances, the unreturned words, the choices made behind closed doors. And if you've lived as long as I have, you know the worst part isn't discovering betrayal. It's knowing you might have been blind to it for years. One night, I decided to follow them. Not stalk, mind you, but observe. I wanted clarity, and sometimes clarity comes at a cost. I watched from the shadows as they walked down the path toward the old barn at the edge of my property. Their voices were soft, but laughter carried on the wind. And then I heard it, a phrase that made my heart skip. You know, Henry might never understand. That pause, that choice of words, that was the split second when I realized life had changed forever. And I knew right then that this wasn't just a small betrayal. It was the beginning of something much more complex, something that would demand patience, strategy, and a resolve I wasn't sure I still had. I retreated into the darkness, letting them pass. But inside, I was already plotting. Not revenge, not yet, just understanding. Because before you strike, you need to see the whole picture. You elders know this. The mind can act faster than the heart, but sometimes it's the heart that holds the key to survival. And as I walked back to my porch, I realized something else. The story I'd lived so far, the story I thought I knew, was about to rewrite itself. And in the silence of that night, I made a choice. Not a loud choice, not one that anyone would see, but a quiet, deliberate one. I would uncover the truth. Every secret, every whisper, every hidden intent. Because betrayal, I learned, isn't just about broken trust. It's about the lessons you choose to take from it. And the question I had to answer was how far I was willing to go to protect what mattered most. And that's when I noticed something on the ground near the barn. Something small, something out of place, something that didn't belong there. I bent down and my blood ran cold. What I held in my hand wasn't just a clue, it was the beginning of a revelation that would change everything. I'll tell you what it was, but not just yet. You see, stories like this, they unfold slowly, and the moment you think you've seen it all, the next twist arrives. Because in life, as in these classic Baital stories, the most dangerous part isn't the betrayal itself, it's what comes after. And tonight, I realized I wasn't ready for it. I knew then that nothing would ever be the same. Stay with me. The truth is coming. The morning after that night at the barn, I woke with a restless mind, the kind that refuses to let you enjoy a single quiet hour. I made my way to the kitchen, the aroma of coffee barely cutting through the fog of worry settling over me. Laura was humming in the background, unaware of the storm brewing in my chest. Michael had already left, claiming he had errands to run, but I knew better. Life has a way of teaching you the difference between innocence and convenience. I sat at the table staring down at the small piece of paper I'd found near the barn. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, a scribbled address, a date, and initials I didn't recognize. But my gut told me it was more than just paper. It was a thread, and I intended to pull it, carefully, methodically, until the whole fabric revealed itself. I spent the day thinking, planning, and observing. There's a certain discipline required when dealing with people who hide truths behind smiles and politeness. They're clever, subtle, but never infallible. I remembered my father once telling me, "Henry, the truth is always in the little things, the pause, the glance, the hesitation. Watch those and you'll see the rest." By mid-afternoon, I decided to confront Michael, not aggressively, not with accusations, but with questions that demanded answers. I found him in the garden, pruning the roses with exaggerated calm, as if he were unaware of my thoughts circling him like hawks above prey. "Good morning," I said, voice steady. He looked up, smiled, that smile, always a little too smooth, a little too rehearsed. "Good morning, Henry. Beautiful day, huh?" I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "You know, I came across something last night near the barn. Thought I should ask you about it." He paused, knife in hand, examining a branch like it held all the answers. "Oh, what did you find?" "A note, small, scribbled, address, date, and initials I didn't recognize." "Do you know anything about it?" Michael straightened and shook his head slowly, like he was considering how to phrase the truth, or at least a version of it that didn't betray him. "No, I haven't seen anything like that." I studied him, every twitch, every hesitation, every blink. He was good, I'll give him that, but not good enough. It's odd, I said, lightly, because it was near the barn where you and Laura were talking that night. He chuckled softly, a sound meant to disarm. Just talking about plans, nothing serious. You know how women are sometimes, always plotting and worrying about nothing. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch, thick and heavy. Silence, I've learned, is often louder than words. It forces people to reveal themselves. And Michael, for all his charm, couldn't quite hide the flicker of unease in his eyes. That evening, I watched Laura from the porch again. She was trimming flowers in the small garden near the fence, humming the same tune she always did, but there was a subtle change in her demeanor, a hesitation in her movements, a distracted glance toward Michael's old car parked at the end of the driveway. And I noticed how she lingered just a little too long on certain letters she had tucked into her apron pocket. I approached gently. "Laura, you've been quiet today. Everything all right?" She looked up, startled, then smiled softly. "Just thinking about things, plans for the farm mostly." I nodded, though something didn't sit right. Life has a way of layering worries, and I was beginning to see the edges of a pattern forming like shadows stretching across a wall at dusk. Later that night, I decided to take a walk along the path leading to the barn. Something about the note, the address, the initials. I needed to see it from the outside, to feel the space, the rhythm of footsteps, the hush of the earth. And as I walked, I caught a faint sound of voices, soft, deliberate, speaking in tones meant to remain private. I recognized Michael's voice, low, controlled, trying to sound casual. But there was another voice I didn't recognize, a woman's, calm, patient, almost soothing. I paused, hiding behind the old oak, heart thumping. They weren't just talking about plans for the farm. There was something else, something I couldn't yet name. I retraced my steps, careful not to make a sound. By the time I reached home, my mind was a whirlwind of questions. Why was Michael involving someone else? Who was she? And what role did Laura play in this? Days passed, and the tension became a living thing in our home. Michael was always present, offering help, engaging in conversations, his words laced with subtle undertones I didn't trust. Laura seemed increasingly distracted, often lost in thought, staring at the horizon as if weighing choices I could only guess at. One evening, I confronted Laura gently, choosing words as carefully as a craftsman carving wood. "Laura, have you been meeting anyone lately, or speaking with someone about decisions?" She hesitated, then shook her head slowly. "Henry, it's complicated. I'm trying to understand what's best for all of us." Her answer was vague, but the tone carried layers of meaning. In my experience, vagueness often hides the most significant truths. I let it pass for now, deciding patience was my ally. Sometimes the story reveals itself in its own time. Then came the unexpected, a package left at our doorstep with no return address. Small, inconspicuous, yet heavy with implication. Inside, I found photographs, Michael and the unknown woman, close, too close. And there, in the corner of each image, subtle traces of messages, objects, gestures that hinted at a plan beyond what anyone would expect. I examined each photograph slowly, as if by doing so I could unravel the motive behind them. Betrayal, I realized, isn't always a single act. It's a series of small decisions, accumulated like grains of sand until they form a tide strong enough to sweep away everything you thought secure. By the next morning, I'd made a choice. Observation alone wasn't enough. I needed clarity, confrontation, and perhaps guidance from my own experience navigating the shadows of human behavior. I began keeping a careful record, dates, times, conversations, small anomalies. Every detail mattered. I found myself reflecting more and more, not just on Michael and Laura, but on my own life. What choices had I made that left gaps for deception? What trust had I placed blindly? And the harder I examined my own past, the clearer it became that betrayal often begins long before the act itself. It begins in moments of oversight, in hesitations, in decisions ignored. One evening, I caught Michael slipping something into his jacket pocket, a small folded piece of paper he tried to hide as he walked past me. The movement was subtle, but in 70 years, subtlety never escapes notice. That piece of paper, what did it contain? A message? Directions? Instructions for what? I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I decided to wait, to watch, to let his own actions guide me toward the truth. Because in matters like these, patience reveals more than confrontation. The weeks that followed were tense, quiet, and methodical. I watched patterns emerge, late-night conversations, coded smiles, the weight of unspoken words, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to see the outline of what had been hidden from me. Betrayal wasn't always loud or dramatic. It was careful, patient, often dressed in friendship and loyalty. I realized then that understanding the full story required more than just observation. It required insight, intuition, and courage, the kind of courage that comes not from confrontation, but from knowing when to act and when to wait. And I knew with that clarity that the decisions I made in the coming days would determine the future, not just for me, but for everyone involved. The night settled in and the house grew quiet. Laura was asleep. Michael's absence left only the ticking of the old clock. I sat alone, thinking, planning, knowing that the next moves would require all the wisdom I had gathered in decades of living. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I understood something I hadn't before. The most dangerous betrayals are not the ones you see, they are the ones you feel coming, quietly, gradually, until the weight of them can no longer be ignored. And so I prepared, patiently, methodically, for what to come. I woke before dawn that morning, the kind of early hour where the world feels paused and every sound is amplified. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black, bitter, grounding. My mind was restless, circling around the patterns I had observed, the whispers, the hidden messages, the glances exchanged like secret signals. And then it hit me. Patience alone wouldn't uncover everything. I needed to act. I decided to confront Michael carefully, not angrily, not with accusation, but with questions that demanded truth. When I found him in the garden, kneeling beside the roses, he looked up and smiled, a little too bright, a little too rehearsed. "Morning, Henry," he said, wiping soil from his hands. "Coffee?" I shook my head, keeping my expression calm. "No, I've got questions, honest questions, and I need honest answers." He raised an eyebrow, curious, cautious. "I'm listening." I watched him carefully, every micro-expression, every flicker in his eyes. The note I found near the barn, the photographs left at the doorstep. Who is she, Michael, and why are you involving her? His face tightened, almost imperceptibly, before he sighed. "Henry, it's not what you think." I leaned forward, voice steady. "Then tell me what it is, because I need to understand before it's too late." Michael hesitated, then looked away, as if measuring the weight of his words against the consequences. "It's complicated. She's someone I've known for a long time, someone who needed help. Laura got involved because she trusted me, trusted us, and I thought I was helping. I didn't think it would come to this." I felt the blood drain from my face. Help? That word sounded hollow in the air. Helping or manipulating? Because that's the difference, Mike. One keeps people safe, the other changes lives without permission. He swallowed, visibly uncomfortable. I didn't want to hurt anyone, especially you, Henry." The irony stung. Hurt? Betrayal is measured not by intention, but by effect. And the effect was clear. Trust fractured, hearts uncertain, loyalties tested. I left him there, pruning roses with trembling hands, and walked toward the barn. The morning fog wrapped around me, thick and cool, carrying with it the scent of damp earth. I needed clarity, and sometimes clarity only comes in solitude. Inside the barn, I found traces, small, nearly invisible things, a folded piece of paper tucked under a loose floorboard, faint impressions of recent footprints, a pen someone had dropped carelessly. Every detail mattered. Every clue was a thread leading to the larger story. I picked up the paper, careful not to disturb anything else. It was a letter written in a careful hand. The words were deliberate, each one carrying weight. Plans, warnings, hints of motives, and a subtle plea, almost hidden, for understanding. Whoever had written it wanted influence, wanted control, wanted something they didn't have. And in that moment, I realized the betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Back at the house, I waited. Laura returned from the market, carrying a basket of vegetables. She smiled, unaware, and I felt the tension rise in my chest. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but I knew timing was everything. I decided to let her speak first. "Henry," she said softly, "I know you've been worried about Michael, about everything. I want you to know I never meant to hide anything from you." I studied her, searching her eyes for truth. "Laura, can you tell me exactly what's going on? Every detail, every choice?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I think it's time you knew. Michael, he didn't just involve me. There's someone else, someone connected to his past. And they've been manipulating things, little by little, to test loyalty, to see how far people would go for what they care about." Her words hung heavy in the air. Manipulation, testing loyalty, the stakes were higher than I imagined. And suddenly, the path forward was no longer just about uncovering truth. It was about deciding what to do with it, how to protect those who mattered, and how to act without losing myself in anger or fear. I looked at her, and I realized the moral dilemma I faced: intervene and risk confrontation, or observe and risk more hidden betrayals. Every choice carried consequences. Every step demanded judgment. And that, my friends, is the hardest lesson life teaches. Sometimes the right choice is the one that demands patience, courage, and a steady heart. Later that night, I returned to the barn. The moonlight filtered through the cracks in the walls, painting the floor in silver and shadow. I unfolded the letter again, tracing the words with my fingers. There was a signature, familiar yet deliberately obscured. I knew the moment had come to confront the unknown, to step into the center of the web that had been spun around us. I took a deep breath and decided the next move would be deliberate, clever, and necessary. Because in stories like these, classic Baital stories for elders, moral stories that linger, you learn that patience, observation, and understanding are more powerful than rash action. And as I turned to leave the barn, I noticed movement in the shadows, quick, deliberate, and cautious. Someone had been watching me, waiting for me to make a choice. And I realized then that the story wasn't just about betrayal or revenge anymore. It was about strategy, about wisdom, and about knowing when to strike. Watch closely. Every choice counts. I knew someone had been waiting for me, and I wasn't sure if it was friend or foe. Keep watching. The truth is closer than you think. The morning came quietly, almost deceptively, as if the world itself held its breath. I sat on the porch, coffee steaming in my hands, thinking over the weeks that had passed, the subtle signs, the hidden messages, the betrayals that had been quietly unfolding. Life has a way of testing your patience, your judgment, and your moral compass. And in 70 years, I've learned that the hardest lessons aren't the ones shouted at you. They're whispered, layered, and discovered in the stillness. I knew I had to act, not out of anger, not for revenge, but for clarity and to protect what truly mattered. Michael and Laura didn't deserve my wrath, but the web of lies around us demanded confrontation. I stood, stretching the stiffness from my back, and walked toward the barn, where so much of the story had quietly revealed itself. As I approached, I noticed the shadows shifting. The same figure I had glimpsed before emerged, cautious, deliberate, waiting. It was her, the woman in the photographs. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of me, and I knew immediately this was the pivotal moment. "You've been very observant," she said, voice calm, almost measured. "But some things are bigger than any of us, Henry." "Bigger than all of us?" I asked. "Manipulation, secrecy, betrayal? Is that bigger than honesty, loyalty, and trust?" She paused, then nodded slowly. "Sometimes it is. People make choices without realizing the consequences. That's why I've been careful, and why he tried to protect you all in his way." Michael stepped out from behind a stack of crates, tension in his posture. "Henry, I didn't want you to get hurt. I only tried to keep everyone safe." I studied him, weighing his words. Safety isn't measured by secrecy, it's measured by trust and transparency. And in this story, every choice had been a test, some subtle, some deliberate. But the truth, I realized, had a clarity all its own. I gestured toward the woman. "Why involve her? Why these secrets?" She sighed, looking at the ground. "Because sometimes the people who care the most aren't the ones in plain sight. Michael and we've been trying to guide events, to prevent harm that might not be visible yet. But the moment you discovered the note, the photographs, everything changed. You had to see it for yourself." Laura appeared then, drawn by the voices, her expression anxious but determined. "Henry, I never wanted to betray you. I only wanted to understand what's right, what's best. But I see now, honesty is the only way forward." And in that moment, the pieces aligned. The subtle signs, the hidden messages, the choices made behind closed doors. Betrayal had never been absolute. It was a test, a series of misjudgments, a complex dance of intention and consequence. I took a deep breath and spoke slowly, carefully, the weight of my words measured by decades of life. "All of you, every choice, every action, it matters, not just in what you do, but in how it affects those around you. Loyalty, honesty, transparency, those aren't just ideals, they're survival." Michael nodded, relief mixed with remorse in his eyes. Laura reached for my hand, squeezing it lightly, silently acknowledging the trust that could be rebuilt. And the woman, she stepped back, fading into the shadows like a lesson that had been delivered. We stood there for a long moment, the barn quiet around us. The air seemed lighter somehow, the tension easing, but I knew the lesson would linger. Betrayal and trust, loyalty and choice, they were threads that wove the fabric of life, delicate and strong all at once. I looked at them, my voice softening, reflective. "You can't control the past, but you can choose what you do next. That's the story, isn't it? Every day, every decision, you either act with honesty or the consequences come calling." Later, alone, I returned to the porch, sipping my coffee, watching the horizon. The morning sun stretched across the fields, warm and forgiving. I thought of the weeks that had passed, the whispers, the doubts, the revelations, and I realized something profound. Life doesn't offer perfect resolutions. It offers understanding, choices, and the chance to move forward wiser than before. I held the photographs again, the note, the reminders of deception and discovery, and I smiled quietly, not because the story had ended, but because the lesson had been clear. Betrayal isn't just about being wronged, it's about recognizing the responsibility we carry to act rightly, to rebuild trust, and to navigate life's twists with integrity. Watch carefully. Every choice shapes the future. I knew some lessons only reveal themselves in the silence after the storm. Reflect on this. What would you do?